This really happened to me, though. At times, I still struggle to believe it myself. It all began the night I discovered my own son had quietly stolen from me, right there in my kitchen, where the old oak table sat under the dim yellow light. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was silent, calculated, and it cut deeper than any shouted words. He thought I was too old to notice, too weak to act. But that was his first mistake. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. When I was 72, I thought the rest of my life would be spent in peace. After all, I'd lived in Dayton, Ohio for over 40 years, in the same brick house with the same garden, and I had raised my only son, Michael, with every ounce of love I had. People in the neighborhood knew me as the quiet widow who never missed Sunday service, who made the best pecan pies, and who still cut her own grass, even with a bad hip. Michael was supposed to be my pride. I had worked 2 jobs teaching at the community college during the day and cleaning offices at night, just so he could go to the University of Cincinnati without drowning in debt. I remember staying up late, rubbing the stiffness out of my hands, telling myself that every blister was worth it if my son had a better future. But lately something in his smile had changed. It wasn't warm anymore. It was tight, sharp, like he was always calculating. When he visited, he'd sit at that same oak table and tap his fingers restlessly, eyes darting toward the cabinet where I kept my documents and the little lockbox with my savings. I told myself it was just nerves, that maybe his new job at the law firm was stressing him out. I wanted to believe that. Still, suspicion crept in. Little things went missing. First, a silver watch that had belonged to my late husband. Then, envelopes of cash I kept tucked away for emergencies. Each time Michael would shrug, pretending not to know. Each time I would swallow the lump in my throat, praying I was wrong. But that night when I caught him red-handed, sliding papers from my cabinet into his sleek black briefcase, I knew the truth. My only son was betraying me. And what he didn't know was that at 72, I was far from defenseless. When I stood there in the doorway that night, the weak hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, I realized the papers in his hand weren't just any papers. They were the deed to my house, the insurance forms and copies of my will. He froze when he saw me, his eyes flickering like a guilty boy caught stealing cookies. But this wasn't childhood anymore. This was my life, my security, the only roof I had. He tried to smile, that same practiced lawyer's smile that probably won over judges and clients. But on me, it looked like a mask that didn't fit Mom. He said, tucking the papers against his side, "I was just organizing things for you, making sure everything's in order." I didn't say a word at first. My hand tightened on the frame of the doorway, not from weakness, but to steady the storm inside me. I had given this boy everything, my youth, my savings, my trust. And now he was standing in my kitchen stealing the last piece of independence I had left. "Put them back," I said finally, my voice sharper than I'd intended. His jaw tightened. For a moment I saw the mask slip the cold calculation underneath. He slid the papers back into his briefcase instead of the cabinet. That was when I knew this wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't a one-time slip. Michael had been planning this. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I just turned and walked to my chair at the oak table, sitting down, slowly, like it was any other night. But inside, I made a vow. If he thought 72 meant helpless, he was about to learn how dangerous it was to underestimate me. I should tell you how we got here, because this betrayal didn't happen overnight. Michael was always clever, even as a child. When he was 10, he managed to convince the corner store clerk to give him a free comic book just by spinning a story about how he'd lost his money in the gutter. I remember laughing back then, thinking my boy's got the gift of persuasion. I never imagined he'd one day use that gift against me. When his father died, Michael was 17. He shut down for a while, and I let him. I figured grief had its own timeline. But soon he started asking questions about money, life insurance, pensions, what we had in savings. It struck me as odd for someone his age, but I brushed it off as his way of coping. By his 20s, he was ambitious, hungry for success. I was proud. He went to law school, graduated, and started working for a firm in Columbus. He had the sharp suits, the polished shoes, and the car that cost more than my house had when we bought it in the 70s. To everyone else, he was a man who'd made it. To me, though, he was still my boy. I never doubted his loyalty until the small cracks started showing. He called less. He only visited when he needed something: money for a down payment, co-signing for a loan, signing over rights to temporary financial agreements. I wanted to believe it was just the strain of adulthood, that once he settled, he'd come back around. But betrayal has a way of sneaking up slow, like rot in the beams of a house. By the time you notice, it's already eaten through the foundation. The night after I caught him with those papers, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains, going over everything in my mind. He thought I wouldn't understand what he was doing. He thought I'd sign anything he put in front of me, but he was wrong. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Michael wasn't just trying to take my house. He was trying to erase my independence entirely. Once the house was in his name, I'd be nothing but a guest in my own life. That's when my fear turned into something else, something sharper: resolve. At 72, I didn't have time to play games. If I wanted to protect what was mine, I had to act quickly and smartly. 2 days later, Michael came back all smiles and charm, carrying a folder of documents. He placed them on the oak table like they were harmless recipes he wanted me to try. "Mom, these are just updates," he said. "Standard stuff. You'll want to sign them so I can help manage things for you." I looked him straight in the eye, hiding the rage boiling in my chest. "You'll read them later," I said calmly. That flicker of annoyance crossed his face again. He wasn't used to me pushing back. He tapped his manicured fingers on the table, then leaned closer. "Mom, trust me. It's easier if we just do it now." I smiled, but it was the soft smile he remembered from childhood. It was the kind that said, "I see you." "No, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "I'll do it on my own time." For the first time, I saw frustration in his eyes. Not panic, not fear, but irritation. He thought he had me cornered, but I had just cracked his confidence. That night, I made my own trip down to the Montgomery County Courthouse in Dayton. I waited in line, my knees aching, my cane steadying me as I shuffled forward. When it was my turn, I asked the clerk for information on property deeds and wills. I explained my situation quietly, and to my surprise, the clerk didn't treat me like a confused old woman. She listened, she nodded, she pointed me toward the right office. By the time I left, I had copies of every legal document tied to my name, tucked neatly into my purse. More importantly, I had clarity. Michael thought he was the only one who understood the law. He forgot that a mother who raised him could learn just as quickly, especially when survival was on the line. I didn't confront him right away. That would have been too easy for him. Instead, I played the part of the trusting old woman, nodding when he talked, sipping my tea while he spun his manipulations inside. Though I was building a plan, brick by brick, because I knew something he didn't. Betrayal cuts both ways, and if he was willing to betray me in silence, then I would learn to betray him in silence too. The night I put the first piece of my revenge into motion, the autumn wind rattled the windows, carrying the smell of fallen leaves through the crack in the kitchen door. I sat at the oak table, phone in hand, dialing a number Michael would never expect, his own partner at the law firm. I smiled as the line connected, my voice steady and calm. "Hello," I said. "I think there's something you should know about your associate, Michael." And just like that, the game began. The partner's name was Lauren Feld, and I knew it because Michael used to brag about her in the way men brag when they need powerful women as armor. She answered on the third ring, clipped but polite. Her voice softened by the late hour. I pictured her office in Columbus on Broad Street, high windows, a view of the Scioto River. The kind of place with glass walls and a fridge full of sparkling water. "You're calling about Michael?" she asked, as if my hesitation spelled a confession already. "Yes," I said, "I'm his mother." "He'll be brief because I imagine billable hours don't stop for anything." He came to my house with documents, deed insurance, my will. He was attempting to move property and authority into his own name. Without my consent, silence. I expected sympathy, a rush of apologies. What I heard instead was a precise intake of breath and a professional distance that told me she'd already navigated a dozen messy calls like mine. "Mrs. Ellison," she said, finally picking each word like a lock. "This sounds like a family matter. If Michael is your designated agent or co-signer." "He is not," I said. "At least not for the deed or the insurance. He has influenced me to sign things before, but I am not under guardianship. I am competent, and he is exploiting the trust of an elderly parent. I have copies." I could almost hear the calculation begin. "Would you be willing to send anything you have for my review?" "He'll bring them," I said. "Tomorrow. To your Columbus office." "That isn't necessary," she said quickly. "Email would suffice." "It's necessary for me." We set the time 10 a.m., and when I hung up, the house was so quiet it felt like a held breath. I sat with my tea growing cold and realized I wasn't shaking. A strange calm had settled on me like snow. In the morning, I dressed the way I used to for parent-teacher conferences. The good wool coat, the navy dress that made me stand straighter, a scarf I'd kept from my honeymoon to Chicago. Confidence is sometimes a costume, but the body believes the costume. After a while, I tucked the copies I'd gotten from the Montgomery County Recorder's office into a leather folio my husband had used for church notes. The drive to Columbus along I-70 felt like leaving one life and steering into another. I passed the outlet mall near Jeffersonville, the billboard for Skyline Chili, the huge red barn that always looked like it could hold a family's entire history. When I pulled into the underground garage on South 3rd Street, I took a moment to watch the electric cars glide in and out, all those quiet machines whispering about the future. The firm's lobby was the color of clean money, white stone steel. The young receptionist wore a headset and the kind of lipstick that doesn't smudge. "Mrs. Ellison," she said, smiling. "Ms. Feld is ready for you." Lauren's office had the view I'd imagined, and the framed degrees that said, "Don't lie to me, I'll know." She was younger than I expected, 40s maybe, with precise hair and a navy pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car. She offered me water, sparkling or still, and I took the still because I'm not a woman who confuses bubbles for meaning. "I'm sorry for the circumstances," she said, sitting across from me with a legal pad. "Tell me exactly what happened." I did. I told her about the watch gone missing, the envelopes of cash, the careful hands sliding my deed into his briefcase. I told her his words. "It's easier if we just do it now," and how he carried his persuasion like a blade. He was sure I'd never see. She asked for dates, names, details. I gave them to her. When I finished, she tapped her pen twice against the pad. "May I see your documents?" I slid them across the glass table between us. My deed, my last will and testament from 8 years back, the homeowner's policy from State Farm, and a folder labeled Durable Power of Attorney Draft. That last one I hadn't signed, but the signature line had a little sticky flag on it, in Michael's handwriting. "Sign here." Mom Lauren studied them, her face a controlled surface. "He prepared this draft. He brought it. I suspect he prepared it, or had someone at the firm do it for him. If so, he knows better." She sighed through her nose quiet, annoyed the way a pianist sighs when a student keeps playing the same wrong note. "Mrs. Ellison, I'm going to be frank. The firm cannot involve itself in a dispute between you and your son if he was acting in any personal capacity. But if he used firm resources or misrepresented firm authority to solicit your signature, that is a different matter, that would violate policy and potentially the rules of professional conduct. Rules don't mean much to men who believe they're exceptions," I said, and to my surprise, she smiled small and quick. "True," she said. "Do you have any texts or emails?" I did. I had saved everything after that night. The texts with links to DocuSign, the messages that said urgent and time-sensitive, and don't make this difficult. Mom, I didn't even know how to screenshot until my neighbor's granddaughter showed me over coffee at Ghostlight on Wayne Avenue. ID practiced, saved printed. Lauren flipped through the pages, occasionally circling something. "We'll need original files if we proceed. But I believe you, Mrs. Ellison. For your own protection, I recommend 3 immediate steps. 1 file, a letter of revocation, for any prior powers of attorney, if any exist. 2 record a transfer on death designation, affidavit for your home, to a beneficiary of your choice, who is not Michael, to prevent inter vivos transfer schemes. 3 speak with an elder law attorney, someone like Peter Abramson in Daytonto. Secure your estate plan and consider a trusted third-party fiduciary." I let all the terms settle inside me like tools in a new box. "And the firm?" I asked. "What do you do with a man like my son?" "We have an ethics committee," she said. "If we determine he attempted to leverage firm status to coerce you, he'll be suspended, pending investigation." Suspended. The word sat there clean and cold. I thought of Michael's leather briefcase, the way his manicured fingers tapped the oak table. He'd always believed a job like his was immunity. "Do what you must," I said, "and he'll do the same." When I stepped back onto the street, the winter sun was pale and a little cruel. I walked a few blocks to the North Market and bought myself a pastry I didn't need, then drove home with the radio off, listening to the road. By the time I reached my house, there was a black Mercedes parked at the curb. Michael leaned against it, phone in hand, talking too loud, the way men talk when they want the world to think their voice fills it. He ended the call and smiled, like nothing in me had changed. "Mom," he said, opening his arms as if the driveway were a stage. "You look nice." "Been out." I said, carrying the folio against my chest like a shield. "Church ladies," he laughed. "On a Tuesday. God doesn't punch a clock," I said, and walked past him. Inside, he followed me all easy charm. "I brought dinner," he said, holding up a bag from Pine Club in Dayton. One of those steaks he knows I like because he likes them too. "Thought we could talk." "Talking is good," I said, setting plates on the counter. "But I'm old-fashioned. I like to chew first." Over dinner, he pivoted and preened. The house needed updates I couldn't afford. He'd found a financial instrument that would unlock equity, while he streamlined responsibilities. The neighborhood was changing, and I needed protection. Each sentence a gift, wrapped around a threat. Michael, I said, finally cutting my steak into stubborn squares. You've always had a talent for making theft sound like help. His eyes flashed. It lasted just a second, but it was enough. Is that what you think? He asked, soft and dangerous. I don't think I said I count. I pulled the folder from under my chair and set it on the table. And when I count what's missing, I find your hands all over the ledger. For the first time since he was a teenager, he looked small to me, not in stature but in spirit. He pushed back from the table and stood pacing the kitchen like a caged arrangement of arguments. You don't understand the complexity here, he said. If something happens to you, probate will eat this house alive. I'm trying to prevent that by putting it in your name. As trustee, as who named you. Trustee, he stopped. You will, he said, and there it was, naked and plain. No, I said, and the word felt like a key sliding into the right lock at last. We didn't finish dinner. He left with the steak in a bag and a storm in his mouth, telling me I was making this hard, that he was busy, that if I loved him, I'd stop sabotaging him. When his car pulled away, I watched the taillights shrink into a red thread and thought of how threads unravel sweaters if you pull hard enough. The next morning, I called the Dayton elder law attorney. Lauren had recommended Abramson Finch on Ludlow Street. The receptionist squeezed me in for that afternoon because I used the magic words, potential elder financial exploitation. When I arrived, the waiting room had low chairs and magazines. Nobody reads anymore. A couple sat across from me. The woman's hands folded in the man's, both of them staring at the same spot on the carpet, like if they looked away, the floor would vanish. Peter Abramson was short, bald on top, and kind, in the way that doesn't ask for credit. He read the documents, asked a few questions. Then he did something rare in lawyers. He leaned back and stayed quiet, long enough to make space for my anger to finish speaking. Here's what well do, he said at last. Well, record an affidavit revoking any powers Michael may have obtained, even implicitly. Well, draft a new will, a new healthcare proxy, and a limited power of attorney, naming a fiduciary service, someone without emotional skin in the game, to act only under specific circumstances you approve. Will also file a notice with your bank to require an in-person verification for any large withdrawals or title changes, and will add a fraud alert with the credit bureaus. Will that stop him? I asked. It will slow him. He said stopping him depends on how loudly he wants to learn. I liked that answer. We spent 2 hours signing, notarizing, recording. I walked out with a folder, heavier than any purse I had ever carried. On my way home, I stopped at the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and asked about filing an incident report, not a formal charge, yet, but a record. The deputy at the desk listened, gave me a pamphlet about the Elder Justice Unit, and wrote everything down carefully. If he comes back and tries anything, she said, call us. He did come back. But not to the house, not yet. He came for my accounts. 2 days later, the bank called. A man named Corey, with a patient voice, informed me that my authorized representative had attempted to move a substantial sum from my savings to an external brokerage account. We halted it because of a flag on your profile, he said, and I could hear the question, sitting there like a chair between us. My representative, I asked. Michael Ellison. He said. I swallowed and kept my voice steady. He is not authorized. He is my son. He is attempting to take funds without my consent. I understand, Corey said, and I believed him. We'll freeze external transfers for 72 hours while you come in to sign a restriction. We'll also put a note on your account, requiring in-branch ID for any future changes. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen staring at the oak table. The wood had scars from years of hot pans and elbows and homework. I ran my fingers over a long, pale scratch and remembered Michael at 7, dragging a toy car along the surface while making engine noises. I had scolded him. Then, he'd looked up with big eyes and promised not to do it again. I drove to the bank on Wilmington Pike, signed the restriction, and then something in me snapped from defense to offense. I stopped at a UPS store and rented a box. I rerouted my statements. I bought a small fireproof safe and bolted it to the floor of the hall closet. Then I took a step I knew would draw blood. I called the Ohio Disciplinary Council. The woman on the line spoke to me as though she'd walked this road with 100 mothers. She explained the grievance process against an attorney, even in personal matters. If conduct implicates professional rules, coercion, undue influence, misuse of firm resources, honesty issues. She gave me an online portal address and said, "Attach all documentation. Facts are your friends. Facts. Screenshots, dates, names." I uploaded it all. I included the attempted transfer noted by the bank. I included a photo from my door camera of Michael arriving with the folder marked "Sign." "Here, Mom." I wrote a statement as clearly as my old typing teacher had trained me at Patterson Co-op High in 1968. No flair, just truth. That night the phone rang at 11:43 p.m. I let it go to voicemail because fear likes to surface as politeness if you let it. 15 minutes later, it rang again. I answered. "You're trying to ruin me," Michael said, his voice low and tight. "Not drunk, we're sober." "Certain you went to Lauren?" I said nothing. "You think you're clever, filing complaints. You have no idea who you're up against. I raised you." I said, "I have every idea." "You won't have that house in 6 months." He said, "You won't have anything. Remember who handles things when it matters?" "I will," I said. "And he'll remember who stole a dead man's watch from his mother's house." Silence burned through the line. Then he said, "You're old. They'll assume you're confused." "I'm 72, I said. "Not invisible." He laughed once, a sound with edges. "We'll see." He hung up. The next morning I woke to 2 emails, the first from Lauren. "The firm has placed Michael on administrative leave, pending investigation. We will be in touch." The second from an address I didn't recognize, but which turned out to be the Disciplinary Council's portal. "Your grievance has been received. A preliminary review will commence." Villain's power doesn't evaporate with a single letter. It shifts shape. Michael's new form arrived as a man in a suit on my porch that afternoon, carrying a clipboard and a vinyl pouch. He introduced himself as a process server. He handed me an envelope inside a petition for guardianship filed by my son in the probate court of Montgomery County. So fresh the paper smelled like the printer. The allegation: cognitive decline, inability to manage financial affairs, risk of self-harm through mismanagement. If I had been standing, my knees would have broken. Fortunately, I was seated on the bench by the door. Tying my shoes, I looked up at the server and asked, "How many mothers get this?" "More than you'd think," he said quietly, and then he was gone. I read the petition twice, 3 times. The words crawled with a venom I recognized from Michael's teenage years. The way he'd exaggerate craft, omit head, cited my age. My supposed confusion with technologies. Me leaving the stove on a lie, a fall in the garden. I'd tripped on a hose, and worst of all, a letter from a physician's assistant at a clinic I'd visited last year for a respiratory infection, where I'd told her I was feeling foggy. He spun fog into forecast. I called Peter. He answered on the second ring, and when I read the words aloud, he didn't say, "Oh my God," or "What a monster." He said, "Okay. Well, contest. Well, file an objection request, an independent evaluation and subpoena, his communications with your banks. We'll also bring in your pastor, your neighbor, your doctor, anyone who can attest to your competence and get you tested today. Today, I know a neuropsychologist on Monument Avenue. He owes me a favor. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a bright office drawing clocks and remembering lists of words and tapping patterns with a pencil. The doctor was kind but thorough, his eyes missing nothing. When we finished, he printed the preliminary findings. No evidence of dementia, mild age-appropriate memory variability, decisional capacity intact. I held the paper like it was a passport out of a country that had never claimed me. On the day of the temporary guardianship hearing, I wore the navy dress again. Peter met me at the courthouse on Liberty Street, and we sat on a bench where I had once waited to pay a traffic ticket. In 1989, Michael arrived with a different kind of partner and attorney who looked like he relished expensive fights. And the moment our eyes met across the hallway, I saw it. Not love, not even anger, contempt. The kind men give to women who refuse to vanish. The judge was a woman with iron-gray hair and a voice that made everyone sit up. Michael's attorney began with a soft-voiced summary designed to sound like concern, aging mother, solitary life, declining faculties. He introduced the PA's letter. He introduced the stove incident. He introduced bank confusion logs that turned out to be my fraud alert calls. Each fact a ghost dressed as a guardian. Then it was Peter's turn. He laid out the attempted deed interference. The banks halted, transfer the draft POA with the sticky note. He handed up the neuropsych evaluation. He produced my neighbor, a nurse at Miami Valley Hospital, who testified that I walk my yard every morning and argue with the mailman about the Bengals, like a woman fully alive. He produced my pastor from First Baptist on Monument, who admitted I sometimes forget hymn numbers, but never forget birthdays. By the time he was done, the courtroom felt like someone had opened a window. The judge denied the temporary guardianship. Her gavel's tap was a small sound, but it traveled all the way into my bones. Then she looked over her glasses at Michael Sir. She said, "It is not the business of this court to referee family animus, but I will caution you, the petition process is designed to protect the vulnerable, not to dispossess them." Outside, the hallway buzzed with other people's lives. Michael approached, jaw so tight, the muscle twitched. "You think this is over," he said. "You've embarrassed me at my firm, dragged me into court, and you think you've won, I think." "I'm breathing," I said. "That's a start." He leaned in so close I could smell the expensive cologne he wore when he wanted to feel bigger than he was. "I took care of Dad when he was dying," he hissed. "I handled everything. And what do I get? A stubborn old woman with a martyr complex. You get a mother with a long memory," I said. "And a file." "What file?" "The one that proves you've been moving money in circles since last year." I said, "You think I don't see the LLCs you created in Delaware? Lornette Ventures, Jobeth Hill, Holdings, fancy names for empty rooms." His eyes widened, just a flicker, the first real crack. He stepped back, recovered and sneered. "You can't touch those, maybe not," I said, "but your firm can, and so can the IRS." For the first time, fear crossed his face like a shadow from a passing cloud. It vanished in a blink, replaced by rage. He turned and strode away, leaving the smell of cologne and the sound of his heels as punctuation. Peter watched him go, then looked at me. "You have more?" he asked softly. I met his gaze. Enough to make a man like him choose which ship he wants to sink. He nodded. "Then, well, build the dock." That night I opened the fireproof safe and took out the USB drive. My neighbor's granddaughter had advised me to buy. On it were copies of Michael's emails that he'd forwarded to myself, records from the county recorder, screenshots of LLC registrations, and something else I hadn't told Peter about yet. A voice memo from my kitchen, months earlier, when Michael had called a friend on speaker and bragged, "It's a simple transfer. Old people don't fight." I listened to that line again. Let it fill the room. Let it find every corner where doubt still hid. Then I slid the drive back into its little velvet pouch and closed the safe. Outside, a car idled at the curb in the dark. I peeked through the curtain and saw a low figure in the driver's seat, a glow of a phone screen. A familiar silhouette turned to watch my house. My pulse found a drumbeat it hadn't known in years. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had been saving for when the air turned heavy, like this Detective Serena Klein of the Elder Justice Unit, the name the deputy had circled in bright ink. She answered after one ring, like she'd been expecting me. "Mrs. Ellison," she said, "is tonight the night?" "It is," I said, watching the idling car, feeling the old oak table behind me, like a witness and detective. "Yes, I think I'm done defending. I think it's time to take something from him he actually cares about." "What's that?" "His reputation," I said, "and the silence he hides behind." In the car outside, a shape shifted and a head lifted toward my window, as if it could smell my decision. I let the curtain fall, squared my shoulders, and told the detective exactly what I had. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment that felt like a fuse burning down. "Understood," she said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't go outside, and Mrs. Ellison, keep your phone recording." I set the phone on the table, thumbed to the recorder, and hit the red circle. The oak gleamed under the kitchen light. My front door was a thin line between my life and what waited in the street, and then the doorknob turned. The knob rattled first, then stilled, then turned again, slowly, deliberately. My pulse quickened, but I didn't move from the oak table. Instead, I angled my phone so its tiny red recording light reflected faintly on the wood. The deadbolt held. Whoever was outside didn't force it, not yet. Instead, I heard a knock, 3 short raps, the way Michael used to knock when he came home from college breaks, as if announcing himself as the prodigal son. "Mom," his voice carried through the wood, smooth and honeyed, the kind of tone he reserved for judges and clients. "It's cold out here. Let me in." I stayed silent. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. We need to talk." His voice dropped lower. "If you keep going down this road, you're going to destroy everything. You think these people care about you. You're just a tool they'll use to take me down." The arrogance, the entitlement. It filled the air like smoke. I didn't move. Then his voice sharpened. "Open the door." Now, I finally stood, walked quietly to the front hall, and called through the door. "Michael, you don't live here anymore. You don't control this house. Or me." Silence for a moment. I thought he might kick it down. Instead, he laughed, short, cruel. "You think your little complaint means anything? He'll have this turned around before you can blink. Judges know me. Firms need me. You'll see." I glanced at the timer on my phone. 12 minutes. Detective Klein would be here soon. I needed him to stay to reveal himself. So I baited him. I filed more than a complaint. I said I filed evidence recordings, transfers, fraudulent drafts with your handwriting all over them, and your partners know. Another silence. Then a hissed curse. His mask cracked. "You senile old witch. You think you can outsmart me. You wouldn't even know where to start." "Oh, but I did," I said, letting each word cut clean. "And the best part, I used your silence against you. Every time you thought you were hiding, I was listening." Recording, the car door outside slammed. I peeked through the curtain headlights, flared another vehicle pulling up behind his Mercedes. A figure stepped out, badge glinting under the street lamp. Detective Serena Klein. Michael must have seen her too. His voice rose, desperate now. "Mom, listen to me. Open the door and we can fix this before it gets ugly. It's already ugly, I said. Then came the pounding on the door, hard and furious fists, shaking the frame. My phone on the table caught every sound, every curse, every word he spat, in a voice stripped of charm. Ungrateful crazy, you owe me everything. I didn't flinch. I sat back down at the table, staring at the wood grain, as the storm raged at my door. The oak held steady just as it had for decades, and then the pounding stopped. Through the thin curtains I saw Detective Klein's flashlight cut across the porch. Her voice rang out calm, but commanding. Michael Ellison. Step away from the door. His silhouette froze, then turned. I couldn't hear his words, but I saw the argument in his posture. The hands raised the indignant shake of his head. She didn't budge. Another squad car rolled up, lights flashing blue and red across my living room walls. When they finally led him to the curb, cuffed and furious, I pressed my palm flat against the table. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from victory. The days that followed felt like stepping into sunlight. After a storm, Detective Klein came by to collect the recording. She listened with headphones, nodding, occasionally scribbling notes. This, she said, combined with the attempted transfer at your bank, the guardianship petition, and the testimony from the firm, this is going to hold. The disciplinary board moved fast, too fast for Michael to wriggle free. Within weeks, he was suspended pending full investigation. His partners, eager to save their own skins, turned over documents showing he had indeed used firm resources for personal matters. And then came the IRS, the LLCSI, had uncovered. Those hollow shells with pretty names were red flags waving in a storm. Klein passed the information along, and soon enough letters arrived at his sleek Columbus apartment. Letters he couldn't charm or threaten away. The man who thought himself untouchable was suddenly tangled in more hands than he could fight. But revenge isn't just about tearing someone down. It's about watching them realize they built their own destruction. I saw Michael only once more. It was at the courthouse again, months later, when the guardianship petition was officially dismissed with prejudice, meaning he could never file it again. He was thinner, his suit less sharp, his eyes carrying the wild glint of a man cornered by his own schemes. He didn't look at me as we left the courtroom. He looked at the floor, and that, I think, was the truest revenge, because the silence he once used as his weapon, the silence of manipulation, of secrets, of quiet theft, was now his prison. Everyone knew, everyone watched, and he could never talk his way out of it. I drove home to Dayton that afternoon, the oak table waiting in the warm light of my kitchen. I brewed a pot of tea, sat down, and laid my hand flat against the wood one more time. The grain was steady. The scars were mine, and the house, the life, the freedom, they were still mine too. I whispered into the quiet, not for him, but for myself. At 72, I was underestimated. At 72, I was betrayed. But at 72, I learned silence cuts both ways. Then I sipped my tea and let the peace settle. Because the truth is, sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't fire. It's calm. The end.